Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, the Toronto Maple Leafs are over the salary cap after re-signing Pierre Engvall, and they still need to re-sign Rasmus Sandin. So I wanted to take a look at some moves that they could make to maybe clear out some cap space, and then if they did, if they had any remaining, if there's any free agents still available that are worth signing. Before we jump into things, if you've watched a couple of these videos already, or if you're new here and you've enjoyed this video by the end of it, make sure to subscribe because I got a good feeling that the Maple Leafs aren't done making moves this offseason. Like we said off the top, the Toronto Maple Leafs a couple of days ago re-signed forward Pierre Engvall to a one-year, $2.25 million deal. Engvall scored 15 goals and 35 points in 78 games last season, playing a larger defensive role for the Maple Leafs on their shutdown line. And in that larger defensive role, Pierre Engvall was very effective. If we're looking at David Kampf's numbers at 5-on-5 from last year, both with and without Pierre Engvall, the difference is just night and day all across the board. Now, Pierre Engvall made that shutdown line good, but Ilya Mikheyev made it even better, and he's not here anymore. So hopefully David Kampf and Pierre Engvall can find some chemistry with either Kalle Järnkrok or Nico Kubel, and the Maple Leafs won't lose anything on what was a very effective shutdown line for them last season. Engvall's a great skater, and he uses his long reach to make effective plays on the puck, but playing in that larger defensive role and being 6'5" and over 200 pounds, I'd like to see him be a really good skater and make effective plays on the puck while also wearing the opponent down. And if he wants to take his game to the next level, I'm going to need Pierre to play a little bit more angry out there. We saw it a couple of times last season, but it wasn't consistent enough. I want him to be angry, but I also don't want him to take stupid penalties. Looking over the contract one more time, I don't think it's bad because it's $2.25 million for a guy who's able to be effective on your shutdown line while giving you around 15 goals and 30 or so points. But I don't think it's good because it's only a one-year deal and he's going to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of it. Not every contract needs to be good or bad. It could just be okay sometimes, and that's what I think the contract for Engvall is. But if we're looking at the Maple Leafs salary cap situation now with him signed, they're about $1.5 million over the salary cap with Rasmus Sandin still to re-sign. I talked about the Rasmus Sandin situation in the previous video that I did here on the channel and then a couple of videos before that, so I'm not going to rehash the whole thing again today, but to say that they're $1.5 million over the salary cap, while it is true, you need to be looking at which players are factoring into that calculation. Do we think guys like Kyle Clifford, Wayne Simmons, Adam Gaudette, and Joey Anderson are absolute locks to make this team? Probably not. When you're looking at their salary cap situation without those guys on the roster, they have about $1.45 million in cap space when factoring in the overage charge that they were hit with at the end of the season to re-sign Sandin and fill out 2 more forward spots. And the Leafs value Sandin similarly to what they do Liljegren, who they signed to a $1.4 million 2-year extension. And if they were to get Sandin on a very similar contract, that would leave them with 0 cap space to fill out 2 more forward spots. But if they moved on from a guy like Justin Holl, well, you'd have $2 million to allocate to 2 more forward spots. Maybe you sign 2 guys to league minimum, and you got some extra space to work with throughout the year. That's not so complicated, but Rasmus Sandin sees himself worth closer to what Adam Boqvist signed for, which is $2.6 million a year for 3 seasons. If we're comparing the two players, Sandin has 28 career points in 88 career games, and Boqvist in almost a third more of the games is almost twice as many points. And points aren't everything for a defenseman, but to just look at the number of games played there, they're not comparables for each other at this point in their careers, especially when you're looking at the Blue Jackets and their blue line this upcoming season. Boqvist is more than likely going to be playing in their top 4. And there's just not room for Rasmus Sandin to play in the Maple Leafs top 4 with Morgan Rielly, Jake Muzzin, and Mark Giordano ahead of him. If he gets into the lineup, he's going to be playing on the 3rd pair. And that really throws a wrench into things. Because even if Sandin signed for $2 million and not 2.6, and you moved out a guy like Justin Holl, you wouldn't have enough cap space left over to ice a 20-man roster. They could have just got more money retained on Matt Murray, but no, they like him, and I mean, I do too, but just not at $4.6 million. But like we said before, if he signed an identical contract to the one that Timothy Liljegren did, and they moved out Justin Holl, they'd have about $2 million to split between 2 forwards to play on their 4th line. If they got 2 guys making league minimum, they'd have about $500,000 in cap space. You might scoff at $500,000 in cap space, but because players' cap hits become prorated in season, that's about enough to acquire a $4 million player at the trade deadline, only getting about 50% salary retained. So then maybe the Maple Leafs decide that they want to move out both Justin Holl and Alex Kerfoot. At that point, if he signed an identical contract to Liljegren, the Maple Leafs would have enough room to sign 2 league minimum forwards and another player making about $4 million. If you're looking at what Kerfoot can get back in a trade, I keep referencing this Calle Jarnkrok deal from last year's trade deadline because both players are fairly similar. They're middle six forwards who could play the wing and the center ice position up and down in your lineup on the power play, the penalty kill. But Kerfoot is probably the better player between the two. I mean, he's coming off of a career best 51 points, while Jarnkrok's career high was 35 a couple of seasons ago. And Kerfoot's had more than that 3 times in his career. So he's probably worth a little bit more than him. And Jarnkrok was able to get back a second, a third, and a seventh. Some people have pointed out that the Connor Brown from Ottawa to Washington trade would be a comparable for what Kerfoot could get in a deal. And the Senators got back a second round pick. The only problem for using the Connor Brown trade as a comparable for what Kerfoot can get back in a trade is that Kerfoot's only owed $750,000 in real money for this upcoming season. His bonus has already been paid out, while a guy like Connor Brown is owed $4 million in real money, and the difference in $3.25 million does have some value. Moving on from Jake Muzzin opens up just as much cap space as trading Alex Kerfoot and Justin Holl, but I don't see it being as likely as moving on from the other two. Whether or not you want to move on from Muzzin this offseason depends on his health, and only he and the team knows the full extent of that. If he's healthy, I 100% want him on the team. If he's not, well, maybe you might want to move on from him. And he's got a full no-trade clause, but a no-trade clause is not a no-move clause. So they could do something similar to what the Lightning did with Ryan McDonagh, where you say you either accept a trade here, or we're placing you on waivers. And the way that the waiver wire works is that it goes from the bottom of the standings up from last season. So he could end up with a team that's nowhere near contention and somewhere he doesn't want to be. So then he would be more inclined to waive the no trade. That's extremely aggressive and it's very cutthroat. But again, if he's healthy, I want him on the team. So if you're moving on from Alex Kerfoot and Justin Holl, who are you spending the cap space that you've just freed up on? There's probably more than 4 free agents remaining that I'd like the Maple Leafs to consider signing, but for the purpose of the video here, these are the 4 that I would heavily consider. Sonny Milano, Danton Heinen, Tyler Mott, and Zach Aston Reese. The Ducks decided to walk away from Sonny Milano and his $1.8 million qualifying offer this offseason, making him a free agent. And he was arbitration eligible, so maybe the Ducks were worried that the arbitrator's award was just going to be more than they were comfortable spending on Milano at this point in his career. And he's also an unrestricted free agent at the end of this upcoming season. So if they weren't going to re-sign him anyway, might as well just let him go a year early. And hey, it puts them in a better position to tank for Connor Bedard. It's probably a combination of those 2 reasons as to why they let him go. But if we're looking at his micro stats from this past season, playing the majority of his minutes with Trevor Zegras, he was a playmaker that was able to find the dangerous areas of the ice while also playing a decent two-way game. At 6 feet tall and just about 200 pounds, he's not overly big or physical, but his skating, playmaking, and two-way game makes him a really good candidate to play next to John Tavares and William Nylander on that second line for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And if it's not Tavares or Nylander there, his skill set still profiles to a top 6 or a middle 6 winger. Danton Heinen is another player that didn't receive a qualifying offer. The Pittsburgh Penguins walking away from the $1.1 million commitment, which made him a free agent. But he did score 18 goals, 15 of them coming at even strength, and he only played around 12 or so minutes a night. So he was a very efficient scorer for the Penguins this past season, putting up 33 points in 76 games. He's a very useful player in transition that can either speed up the game or slow it down, and he could be valuable on a number of teams. The next player is Zach Aston Reese, and he's just a regular free agent coming off of a contract that saw him make $1.725 million a year. He actually received Selke votes a couple of years ago, and I want you to think of him as a more physical David Kampf. And what I mean by that is that he is all defense and no offense, but he is a dogged forechecker, and he was someone who was near the league leaders in hits per 60 minutes last year in terms of forwards. He's someone that you'd have a lot of fun watching on your team and could be a value add for the Maple Leafs at this point in the offseason. Tyler Mott's the last player on my list, and he's a UFA coming off of a $1.225 million a year deal. And the way that I want you to think about him is that he's just a lunchbox fourth liner. At 5'10" and 190 pounds, he's not overly big, but he's going to throw hits, he's going to block shots, and he's going to take the puck away off of other players, which is a lot of fun to watch. Now, if you're moving on from Alex Kerfoot and you have 3 forward spots to fill, ideally, I'd want to sign at least 2 of those guys and then fill out the third spot with someone making about league minimum or so. And that would leave the Leafs with about $4.75 million after factoring in the overage to sign 2 of those guys. And you might be in tough to do so. Danton Heinen reportedly wanted around $3 million on his next contract. But as Kyle Dubas pointed out earlier in the offseason, Toronto's been a great place for free agents to sign and then make a boatload of money on their next contract. And as we move further and further into the offseason and guys like Danton Heinen and Zach Aston Reese and Sonny Milano and Tyler Mott are without teams, maybe they'd be willing to take a little bit less money to play on a team that is looking to contend. But either way, they'd have at least enough money to sign one of those guys, and if I had to pick just one of them, it would be Sonny Milano. One of the biggest problems with the Maple Leafs last year was the inconsistencies of that second line with John Tavares and William Nylander there, and I think Milano, out of those 4 guys, or the other remaining free agents, has the best potential to fill a spot in your top 6 and be good, I guess, for a lack of better words. If you went with Sonny Milano on like a 1-year, $3 million deal and then filled out that fourth line with some cheaper options, you'd have enough cap space to start the year with a 21-man roster and around $200,000 in extra cap space, which would be more flexibility than the Leafs have had in years past to start the season. And you'd also have some assets that you would have gotten back from moving on from Justin Hall and Alex Kerfoot that you could use later on down the line at the trade deadline to greater improve this team. If the Maple Leafs were to go into the regular season with a team that's similar to what's on the screen right now, I don't want to say whether or not that they'd be better or worse than what they were to end off last year. Just because I think that that's a loaded question, and if you're answering it, oh, they're better or oh, they're worse, I think you're ignoring some of the reasons why they made the decisions that they did. So I'm going to wait until they're done making moves because like we showed in this video, it's evident that they still need to make some more moves. And when they're done, I'll do a video trying to answer that question, but I don't think it's as simple as, yes, they're better, no, they're worse. And even if they are worse to start the regular season, there's still an entire season to go through and a trade deadline. The team that you start the regular season with is not the team that you go into the playoffs with. So I guess we'll have to see. And until then, make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more because more is always on the way. And guys, I'll see you again in the next one.